Yo, yo, what's up, everybody? Yo, what's up, everybody? What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? Good to see you all. Technically, good to see you all. What's up? Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Wednesday. What's up? What's up? What's up, everybody? Good to see you all today. Come on in. Come on in. Come on in. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the MuseRoom. So good to see you all. What's up? What's up? Come on in. Come on in. I am excited to be in conversation with you all today. Lots to talk about, lots to unpack. Yeah, lots to unpack, y'all. Yo, 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 yo. What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? Okay, I'm excited, y'all. What's happening? Kendall, check your text too as well. I am so excited. I feel like I'm in a different location every time I'm doing these muse rooms, which is the beauty of being able. Getting some. My headroom is cut off. That is the beauty of technology, that I'm able to be in different places and doing it. It kind of makes it fun. But I am in New York City, but on the run. So I feel like now every time I do the muse room on Wednesdays, I just need to make sure I have my laptop ready, because I just never know where the day is going to take me. I gotta say, man, it is feeling like fall here in New York City. I don't know what the temperature is like where you all are at, but here in New York, it's definitely in the 70s. I'm not mad at it. My friend Ashley, she's really upset about it. She wants a little bit more time for summer. I also too want summer. I'm enjoying the summer. I do love warm weather, but there is nothing like the fall for me. I like jackets and sweaters and denim jackets. I love all things pumpkin, so I'm excited for that. And fall just means football, so I love the football season as back. So it reminds me of that. So I don't know. I'm actually enjoying it a lot. So I'm happy about that. Also, Kendall, if you could check your text or respond back to me on text too as well. Um, yeah, so let me know, like, what do you enjoy? Do you wish you had a little bit more time? Do you want more warmer weather? Are you a fall person? Like, tell me what's your vibes and what kind of person that you are. And we can kind of go from there. I see everybody is pulling up in here. What's happening? We have Atlanta in the building. What's up, Lisa? Maurice. Good afternoon from Oklahoma. Oklahoma, eh? All right. I haven't talked to anyone from Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma might be the first one in the museum to pull up. No, Maurice, you've been around, huh? You've been here around. What up, Steph? Vegas. I mean, is Vegas experiencing fall weather, or y'all just hot all around? What up, Paul? Blessings to you too as well, my friend Justin Johnson. I love a good alliteration. Indianapolis is in the building. You guys have the Circle City Classic, right, Stephanie? Did you ever go to the Circle City Classic? I can't remember if we did that with Nesby or not. But Justin, does the Circle City Classic still go on? What up, Maureen? Maureen's my favorite from upstate. And for me, anything outside of New York City is upstate. So I'm sorry, Maureen, but that's just upstate to me. Waylon, El Paso, what's good? And my main man, my main truck driver is in the building. Hobo Cop, what's good? Howdy, sir. Back to you. What's up, Benita? Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Is it Winston-Salem State? Isn't that it too as well right there? Benita, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you left fall too as well. Same here, man. Anthony James, what's up? You got to do a tribute to Malcolm Jamal Mourning. That is very true. What was the name of his sweater? The what was the Gordon? Oh my God, somebody help me out. What was the name of that sweater that he had? A Gordon Gartrell. Gartrell? Anywho, someone will help me out with that one. What up, KT Rose? Your coworker recommended to you. Thank you. Welcome, KT Rose. I'm happy that you were here. I hope you enjoy yourself, and I hope to see you back here next week if I do my job well. Marine hates winter. All right. Yes. So if you did do the Circle City parade stuff, okay, cool. What up, Phoenix? Scorpio 21's in the building. Jody Thompson is here in the building too as well. Ted was good. Me. I think it's always just hot there. Okay, it's good to see that the Black Expo is still going down. The Circle City Classic is still happening, and it was a Gordon Gartrell. I was racking my brains. I couldn't remember what it was, but yes, it was a Gordon Gartrell. I think one was missing a sleeve, or the sleeve didn't have an opening into it, and so he couldn't turn it around. Look at you taking me down pop culture lane before we even get to the cultural moments of the MuseRoom. Okay, I see what you did there. I ain't mad at you. I ain't mad at you at all. Okay, Winston-Salem State University is here. Oh wow, Classic already started yesterday. Oh whoa, you're an Uber Lyft driver and it's been busy. Make sure you DM me. I want to talk to you about Uber Lyft right now, particularly during this time period that we're in. I want to know like what it's like for the back to school craze. Yeah, so pull up with me. Make sure you send me a DM. You might be one of my focus groups when it comes to shared rider servers. I'm curious to see, have you opted in? Audience, have you heard about the option where female riders can request female drivers only? I don't know if that's completely rolled out throughout all the country, but you might be able to fact check me in the chat, or if it's just in select markets. So all the ladies out there, would you want the option where you could do female only drivers? And then Benita, let me know if you see an uptick in people requesting female drivers, or if you can't see that data on your side. That's what I'm curious about. So put it in the chat, and also to a DM me too, but I think that people want to know in the chat too what that is. Oh, Cameron T, you are the co-worker. All right. That's awesome. Also, Chula Citizen, it's been the morning. What's up? Cam in Baltimore. What's up, Cam? Leland, I made it. I thought I was late again. No, Leland, you're not late. You're not late. Oh, okay. So Benita said it's called Women Connect. If you can choose that. Yeah, we did a story about that at ABC, and I thought it was very interesting. When it comes to that. All right, let's just get into it, folks. Love always connecting with you guys all in the chat. I think we're ready now. I can see the other screen. We can just thank you so much, Ken. I really appreciate you. Y'all salute to my partner in crime with all this, Kendall. She is the best EA and thought partner this side of the Mason-Dixie, as they say. I don't do this alone. I have an incredible team, not just for the MuseRoom, but just for my whole life. It takes a lot for my life to run, and I'm not a team of one. I'm very thankful for that. So thank you to the team out there who holds me down throughout all my shenanigans, and for the random text messages. My team had to get used to the way that I talk and communicate, because the way I talk and communicate in person is the same too as well, but I'm very like, okay, let's just get to it. Quick question, right? And so I'm really appreciative of the team for understanding mic speak. So thank you all so much for that. So look, a lot to talk about, so I want to get into it, but let me know what you're interested in talking about on my docket today. You let me know what's on your docket today, but on my docket today, I'm going to talk about, obviously, Zalinsky came to Washington. Zalinsky goes to Washington to meet with President Trump. He brought his Western allies of different countries in Europe at his side. I'm definitely going to talk about the Smithsonian and what's happening there. Going to talk about some redistricting that is happening right now in Texas. That could come anytime soon. We can see the maps being redrawn within Texas, and then what's going to be the response from California, and what is that shaping out to be, and what does that look like? Definitely it's back to school. Benita's already queued me up already, but I want to really lean in to the international students. And not just from an immigration perspective, but really I want to lean into it from a economics perspective and point of view. And then from cultural, y'all let me know what you want to talk about culturally, but I really want to bring into the chat Build a Band. I just finished it. Chokehold. It has me in that show had me in a chokehold. I stopped watching like reality music based programs, but that one, wow. And I want to talk about, I have some data and some research on the psychology of binging versus it being released every week. I want to know, like, what is your preference and what do you prefer? And then I have some Muse movements here that I want to talk about in terms of how we can help solve some of these issues, because, I don't like to be in a soapbox, right? I don't like when we just feel like there's nothing that we can do. As I always say, every MuseRoom from Chanel Hardy, the cavalry is not coming to save us. And so what can we do to protect the things that we really care about and moving forward? So I'm going to just jump into it, but you leave some comments, keep it going. Let me know the things you guys are interested in me addressing. And as always, put the questions in there and I'll be able to respond to your questions in real time. There's nothing pre-planned here. There's nothing canned. I actually don't even see the questions because once I get started, I just really zone in, and then my team puts the questions up on the screen for me, and then I'm able to answer questions right there. So that's the beauty of the MuseRoom. I love the engagement and the feedback immediately, but just really quickly, if you're following my newsletter for the talking points, you're probably a little bit up to date. But for those of you not, what are you waiting for? Make sure you subscribe to the newsletter. You can find that in my Instagram bio page. But it's really about what I'm seeing happening right now with Zalinsky when he came to Washington, D.C., and kind of where we are with that. This is probably going to be one of the most consequential geopolitical moments of President Trump's administration. This is something that will be his signature, one of his signature things that he's known for. And every president is always known for something, right? In terms of, you think about Obama, you think about like Obamacare, right? You think about Bush, you think about what he did for 9/11, you think about the Iraq War, right? So you think about those different dynamics. You think about the bailouts, you think about the automotive industry, right? You think about Trump, pre-Trump first term. You think about the Supreme Court and what he's thinking about in terms of how he's reshaped the Supreme Court. So there's always these signature things that the president will be known for. And I really do think that one of the many things, Trump is operating at lightning speed here. But in terms of from a geopolitical and diplomatic perspective, I do think that how he handles Russia and Ukraine will be something that will be studied, and also to position him in history for something that will be talked about. He started the summit going into the weekend in Alaska with President Putin, really putting Putin on the global stage and putting him face to face with a sitting American president. And that is something that Putin has always wanted. So there was controversy when it came to that in terms of, are we rewarding bad behavior, right? And if you're rewarding bad behavior, the bad behavior is authoritarian leaders and authoritarian regimes being able to just invade sovereign countries and sovereign land, and then they get rewarded for that with no pushback. And so there was this thought process that, is Putin being rewarded? And then does that give him pause without having to face any consequences? Would that slow him down for further advancements into Ukraine? Or what impact would that have on him possibly taking over other or infiltrating other sovereign nations? And then we're looking at other authoritarian leaders in countries, in particular, when you look at what's happening with China and what their interest is in Taiwan, right? If they recognize that the West in America is not applying any consequences to Putin for invading a sovereign nation, what does that look like with China, as they've always had their sights set on Taiwan too as well? And so this was this thought process of what was rewarding bad behavior. As a result of what came out of that was that Putin did not want a ceasefire. And so as a result of that, President Trump sided with Putin when it comes to having a ceasefire. And so he leaned on the Putin side until we got to Monday, where we got a chance to see President Zalinsky return to the White House after the first meeting that he had at the White House with the meeting with Vice President Pence and President Trump. That didn't go well, if you guys remember. He was berated in part because Trump and Zalinsky didn't feel like he was grateful enough to America and for the American support. They also, too, didn't like the way that he didn't wear a suit, that he showed up in his typical commander fatigues because he is in the middle of war. And so what he did was he brought allies from the European Union and from European countries, and they wanted to be there too as well, because not only did they want to show a sign of alliance, right, with Zelensky, but the fate of Europe is also too in the hands of what this war looks like, because a stabilized Europe, a stabilized Central Europe, is good for the stabilization of geopolitics and is really stable for peace and consistency within the globe. And they have as much to risk as well if Putin was to continue his advancement and makes good on one of his goals and objectives, which is this reimagining of the Soviet Union, right? This reimagining of the USSR. And so if this is to be rewarded from, if he is to be rewarded by doing this, and he was to begin to reimagine what the USSR is, that has a big impact on Europe. I'm looking at you, Poland, right? Because that will have an impact on Poland. And also, that would then have an impact on the NATO treaty that we have, because every member nation that is a part of NATO, there is a dynamic with Article 5, is that if one nation is in conflict, other NATO countries have to come in to assist that, right? And so what does that look like going forward if Putin was to think about Poland, right? And then what does that look like if Ukraine is in NATO, which is something that Putin does not want? Putin said under no conditions will he want Ukraine in NATO, to which President Trump also too does not want Ukraine to be a part of NATO. But what came out of the discussion on Monday was whether or not Ukraine could be guaranteed NATO-like security, and meaning light. NATO security, and what would that look like, right? And then what would be the line that would trigger possible full-on admissions into NATO if Putin was to not regard any of the agreements that was to come out of a possible trilateral meeting in order to bring this war to an end. What did come out of that, though, is that what Trump mentioned was that Trump and the U.S. will back a European-led support for Ukraine, meaning Europe would have boots on the ground to protect Ukrainian security, and we would position support from intelligence, possible financial, also in the continuation of selling our arms to the EU and to Europe, so that then they could buy from us in order to give to Ukraine for their support. And for their national security. And then we will also to provide aerial support, but without putting boots on the ground. So that was the takeaway. Outside of that, there was not much more of a takeaway. But besides of that, there still isn't an agreement on the table for a war to conclude. What we're looking at right now is that Zalinsky said underneath no conditions does he want to concede any parts of his land back to Russia. But then also, too, he mentioned that constitutionally, he doesn't have that right. That will have to be taken up from the Ukrainian people in order for them to concede constitutionally. Now, we are in war, right? And so what does that look like, right? Will things be able to supersede? This is what the European leaders are currently working on right now, is what are the next steps ahead, right? But that's also too part of the challenge and the danger of doing it reverse, right? The idea is you want to have typically your policy papers and positions ahead of time going in to a summit like we saw on Friday and on Monday, because that way you have your position papers and you can kind of hash out some of the details in person versus ideating it, versus now doing it the inverse, which is almost antithetical to how diplomacy is usually done. But President Trump is not a usual president. And so what he is doing now is on his way, on his terms, to which he's announced that he is interested in possibly looking at trilateral meetings to be held with Putin, Zalinsky, and Trump himself. Trump has also too said that he would like to see Zalinsky and Putin have a bilateral meeting, just them together. Obviously, buys two, tries three, 2 people, 3 people. And so he would like to see a trilateral meeting possibly come together, with him included in the room, but he definitely wants first to see what does it look like with just the two of them together. I don't think that's a possibility. I don't see Putin meeting with Zalinsky anytime soon. I also, too, don't see Putin meeting from a trilateral perspective unless the concessions are on the table, that he gets all of the land that he wants. Think about Crimea and the Donbass region. I don't see any ways that he sits down in a trilateral meeting if those assurances and those agreements are not already met ahead of time. So this is what I mean when I say that this will be a very consequential moment in Trump's second term and early part of his tenure and his second term regarding how will he handle diplomacy, how will he handle this conflict and bring it to an end. I think what he's recognizing is important for also to the audience, for you all to recognize too as well, that diplomacy is hard. And geopolitical dynamics is a very complicated dynamic at play. And Trump came into office saying that he'll be able to bring this war to an end on day one. That's just not possible, right? There's just too many factors that are at play right now. And that is a challenge that we see at head. So let me know if you have questions and comments and thoughts regarding what we see right now with Zalinsky on Monday and what we see happening on Friday last week in Alaska, because it is a lot just to kind of take in. But hopefully, we've all been talking on this journey here at the Newsroom, on the Sway in the Morning, on the Mike Muse Show, through the newsletters. I've been really bringing you guys up to date with everything. So now this is more of an additive to kind of where we are. And so let me know your thoughts on this. And do you think that ultimately this war ends with Ukraine having to officially concede a certain percentage, around 20% of their land to Russia in order for this war to come to an end? Or do you think that Putin would give in to not ending the war with not getting all of the land for him? This is just about a land grab, pure and simple. This isn't about anything else but a land grab ahead. And now I'm speaking of land grabs. I'm kind of thinking about 40 acres and a mule here right now. I'm going to move over to the Smithsonian unless there's any comments that we have and questions that I can't see right now regarding that. But if not, we'll talk about the Smithsonian and where we are heading forward with that. I know this has come up at a time that we didn't expect, although we did see it coming when President Trump in the spring offered an executive order really examining cultural institutions and to look at any exhibits in wording and language that might be antithetical to President Trump's version of history, and to have things removed. He has now sent a formal letter to the head of the Smithsonian Institute asking that any exhibits or literature or things that are pointing to wokeness or things that are pointing to history that does not serve his version of American history, that doesn't serve any other parts of history, that is more revisionist. And he particularly leaned into the word woke for that to be removed. Folks, we're looking at an erasure of history, like right before our eyes. There really is no way to put it. And if you think about it, we really have been tracking and trending towards this anti-Blackness dynamic at hand. When you think about a few years ago, or not even a few years ago, a couple of decades ago, you started thinking about affirmative action, and you started thinking about the Supreme Court cases around affirmative action. That kind of has a personal insight to me, is because that happened while I was at the University of Michigan. There was a incoming student who thought that a Black person took her seat. And so there's always been this idea of Blackness that's been associated to affirmative action. And then you move forward and you look at what's happening with DEI. There's this idea of Blackness and those who are unqualified are getting jobs. I remember having a conversation even outside the country to a family that was actually living in America, but we were visiting at the same place out of the country at the same time. And they was expressing their disappointment about their child, just to keep everything neutral because I know they're watching, their child not be able to get into certain colleges, right? And kind of blamed it on DEI and their child didn't have a chance to begin with. And I was like, but that's just not true, right? I know particular Black students who did not get accepted to the University of Michigan, for example, right? And it's a numbers game, right? In that year, we had 115,000 applicants apply to the University of Michigan for about 4,000. It's just a numbers game. The 111,000 people are not going to be able to get accepted. And so it isn't a Black thing. No one is taking your seats. But for some reason, there is this anti-Blackness at play and the dynamic. If I can just lean into that before I even get to the Smithsonian thing, we really want to talk about merit, right? And people who are like deserving. Look, I will be fair game for all of it, right? All right, cool. You want to get rid of affirmative action. If you want to get rid of with the way that we look at creating an environment in college universities that foster diversity of thought and ideals. You want to get rid of that? All right. But in order for that to happen, I'm going to lean in a little bit further. Let's get rid of athletic scholarships then, right? Because athletes are admitted to these universities with a different metrics and different standards that are typically less than what a typical student would need to get in who isn't an athlete in terms of requirements being met. So let's call it a fair game then. Let's make sure then the athletes are not accepted for scholarships until after they are admitted, right, into that college university. And then once they're admitted, then they can try out for the lacrosse team, for the golf team, for the diving team, for the swimming team, for the baseball team, for the soccer team, right? So then we can make sure we get it on the metrics. Then we can do it that way, right? Then also, too, let's make sure then when you're applying for a school, you don't put the name of your high school, right? Because we all know certain high schools have a certain credibility aspect to it that when admission counselors see that high school, they say, oh, this is a good school, right? So then let's get rid of that, too, as well. Let's just make them just strictly about GPAs and I guess an essay, right? So let's get rid of any association attributions to your school. Let's also too get rid of the idea of putting donors' names to when they give to college universities, right? Let's just make all donations anonymous, right? So then that way we can't trace a donor who has given to a student, to a school, to their child who was possibly looking for a favor, which is why some of these people actually donate to these college universities. Let's make that anonymous too as well. So there is this blind spot when it comes to this idea of what is merit. There is this blind spot of what it comes to in terms of how people are admitted into colleges and universities, that it isn't just about a Black thing, right? But for some reason it is. And so I just don't understand why we haven't talked about the full scope and breadth of what it takes to get into college admissions, and why we have yet to talk about the athletes who are on campuses, right? We have yet to talk about that. We've yet to talk about how certain schools get a certain wink because they're known as a good school, right? And so let's talk about that, right? But I don't think they want to have that conversation, right? Let's just make it purely just about your name, maybe your social security number, your GPA, your ACT, SAT score, and then that's it, right? Let's decide that way, right? But they don't want to have that conversation. That seems to be missing, which leads me to the Smithsonian. The thing about erasing history is that you don't get a chance to make sure you learn from the past in order to make sure that you don't repeat the past, right? And the idea that they could even want to remove difficult and uncomfortable moments from history because it doesn't suit their narrative. I don't know how you talk about the Civil War if you don't talk about slavery. Slavery happened. And if you don't talk about slavery, then how can you talk about the Civil War? The Civil War was fought because of slavery. The Civil War was fought because of states' rights and states wanting to maintain slavery to build their economics into their state. So how can we talk about Civil War if we don't talk about slavery? How can we talk about women's suffrage and women's rights if we don't talk about the 14th Amendment? The 14th Amendment is what allowed in the beginning Black men the ability to vote, which a part of the women's suffrage, there's a split in the vision between the two camps of women's suffrage. Some members of the camp of the women's suffrage was anti the 14th Amendment vote, giving the Black person, the Black man, the right to vote because it excluded gender, it excluded women. Some, on the other hand, like W. Du Bois, really supported the 14th Amendment because they thought that any advancement on voting was significant that can then be a building block of that. So you can't put the women's suffrage and women's right to vote in conversation without having the 14th Amendment being discussed. Also, the 14th Amendment is what established birthright citizenship, which is something we're debating right now in society and public discourse, is birthright citizenship. But the birthright citizenship were birthed out of slavery so that enslaved people and the descendants of enslaved people would be rights of citizens to own and to have all the privileges of every American here. That is what, when you are born here, no matter what your heritage is, if you're born here, you are an American citizen. That came from the 14th Amendment. So how can you then talk about birthright citizenship? How can you talk about policies of today if you don't talk about the 14th Amendment, you don't talk about slavery? If you don't talk about the way that we're looking at now capitalism, the way that we're looking at Wall Street, the way that we're even looking at digital currencies and cryptocurrencies, right? We can't talk about that if we can't talk about slavery. Why? Slavery was the original commodity. Slaves were traded on Wall Street. Insurance, slave mortgages, right? That was built on slavery. So we can't talk about the foundations of American capitalism and we can't talk about the foundation of Wall Street if we don't talk about slavery, when slavery were a commodity. You also too can't talk about the agricultural boom that existed because of enslaved people when they brought their techniques from the continent of Africa here to the United States in terms of the harvesting and the rice and the way that they did the techniques. That was what they brought over that was able to expand the agricultural success of what America is today. You can't talk about agricultural success of today without talking about the enslaved people and what they brought to it. You can't talk about the burgeoning of the cotton industry, which is one of the strongest commodities in the United States, if you can't talk about slavery in the way that when we picked it, but also to the invention of the cotton gin, which was invented by an enslaved person that allowed for the scale of the cotton to go through. So you can't talk about the boom in agriculture if it wasn't for slaves. You can't talk about the boom of the railroad and the systems and infrastructure of the United States if you can't talk about the enslaved people, because enslaved people built the railroad, right? They built the infrastructure that we have. So now how then do you talk about the railroads, right? We're all watching Gilded Age right now, but how do you talk about that without talking about the individuals who built it? How then do you talk about the nation's capital with the infrastructure? Excuse me, not just the infrastructure, but the buildings, the White House, all the monuments, right? The buildings that we see in Washington right now, where it's so celebrated from an architectural perspective. You don't talk about who built it. You know, America has a great fascination of Frank Gehry. I love Frank, right? He's an incredible architect. But you can't talk about that without talking about how things were built and created, and that was built on the backs of slaves. You can't talk about these things without talking about slavery. It's a very complicated, uncomfortable position that we have here in America, but it happened and it has to be discussed. The full picture has to be discussed in totality. How can you not talk about these great things that we love around music? We love blues, we love jazz, we love rock, we love gospel. That was birthed out of enslaved people from the continent of Africa bringing the banjo, right? A circular instrument that we now know to be a form of the banjo coming to the Delta, Mississippi, which is how we got created country, blues, jazz, rock, gospel. How do you talk about that without talking about the origins of this? You think this music just became because it became? No, it had to come from somewhere. So you have to trace the lineage of it. And so when you trace the lineage of it, this is what you're tracing, right? But how can you talk about it? You can't talk about the formation of the Black church if you don't talk about the enslaved people. When you bring in the African cultures and rituals and spiritual dynamics that the enslaved people brought from the continent of Africa and merged it with Christianity that we have now, that is what we get out of the Black church. This is what you get, the call and response. That is beyond the gospel music, but you get a whole demographic and denomination and a category of the Black church, right? That is for the call and response, but also not just for the gospel music, but folks, the foundation, the bedrock of civil rights was the Black church. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, sometimes we forget to put the Reverend in front of the good doctor, but the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. The organization of civil rights was the bedrock of that, was the church. The Black church was responsible for so many of the civil rights, the songs, the hymns that you hear, that you sing. Slaves use hymns and songs in order to do a couple of things. One, to keep time, right? One, to keep the measurement of how much cotton they were actually pulling, right? And so the hymnals, the call and response, that's all a part of that. You can't talk about the great dynamics of food that we have here if it wasn't for enslaved people. The whole provenance of so much Southern cuisine is out of the enslaved people, right? This is where it came from. So you can't talk about the origins. You can't talk about where we are now if you don't talk about the past. And you talk about the past, you don't repeat it, and you learn from it, right? That it's America. It's a very complicated history. It's a very ugly history, right? But it is our history. We can't pick and choose the history, but we must learn from the history. And so I'm just going to just stop right there just to see if you guys have any questions or comments about anything. Anthony James says, uncomfortable, yes. complicated. Not much, to be honest, Anthony. Yes, it's very uncomfortable, but we have to learn from it. Just the way I don't see any pushback about when we bring up the Holocaust, right? The Holocaust happened, and it's important that it's studied. It's important that we know it, right? So you don't repeat it. I was saying earlier on ABC that I had to take AP European history when I was in high. I didn't have to. AP courses was a choice, right? But we didn't have to. I chose it because one, it made me more scholarly, but one allowed me to put and to connect the dots of a pedigree, of lineage. It allowed me to put conversations and connect the dots to what was happening in Europe to what's happening here domestically, right? And so if I can learn about European history, world history, US history, how come individuals can't learn about African American history? And I want to be clear, African American history, Black American history is American history. There's no delineation from it. It is American history. American history is vast. It's broad. It all is history. Leland, you say it's past audacious. They've turned it into power and action. And that part scares the most. Yes, I was saying in the morning, I was talking about the difference in power between federal and states. And so because Smithsonian is under the auspice of the federal government, President Trump is in his right to move forward in the way that he is. Because he's a president and the president oversees the federal government. And it kind of goes to the difference between states' rights and what the states are able to control and what the states are able to have. And I think about like voting elections that I'm going to talk about here in a few seconds. Leah Sutton asked a question, what is he scared of? I don't know what he's scared of, but I just know that people have a difficult time in the uncomfortable. People have a difficult time facing their fears. People have a difficult time facing history. People have a difficult time reckoning with the past and resolving it. I think also too, some people have this thought that America is perfect, right? I think a lot of people have this very Hollywood romance idea of America that doesn't often paint it within a full story. America is beautiful. I love America. I celebrate the 4th of July, right? Like, because Black people fought for this. Enslaved people, my ancestors, my lineage, fought for me to be able to sit here and talk with you wonderful people in the MuseRoom. My ancestors fought for me to live the life that I had, to live a life that they couldn't. That to be celebrated. That is American history. My ancestors fought in all the wars, right, on behalf of America, and then come back to a segregated Jim Crow space in America, and couldn't quite receive all the things that they were entitled to from the GI Bill, right, which allowed so many white Americans to get into middle class. And that's when you start seeing the delineation of Black people not being able to get into the middle class, or the challenge of Black people not being able to get into the middle class because they couldn't access the benefits of the GI Bill, right? My Black people fought and died for this country and for the freedoms that we have. That should be celebrated. That's American history, right? America is complicated and it's beautiful. I am proud to be an American, right? And I celebrate it, but I'm aware that America is complicated and America has an ugly history, right? I'm also too aware that we're making beautiful history, even in its complications. The idea of America as an imperfect union, and our role through democracy and our vote is to make it more perfect as we go. Ted Lamb, they're trying to rewrite history. I don't know if that's a question, Ted, or I think that might be just a statement. I think you're making a statement on that one. And let's see. Waylon Chisholm says, talk on all of it, Mike. They're not mad at the kid who got in because the family paid for them to get in. And oh yeah, you're talking about when it comes to the admission process, right? And when it comes to the admission portions, yeah, I know. It's a lot to think about. And I think they don't want to have that. For me, I don't think people want to have that conversation. I mentioned, if you don't have any more but keep the comments and questions going. But if you don't have any immediate questions right now about that, I want to lend and go into the federal elections. Excuse me. I want to talk about what President Trump mentioned about an executive order to get rid of mail-in ballots. I think this kind of allows us to kind of transition from what I just talked about, and the purview, the portfolio that President Trump has as a president versus states. So this goes to federal rights versus states' rights. So if you're not familiar with it, President Trump issued executive order looking to get rid of mail-in ballots, really showing that their mail-in ballots cannot be trusted, and it creates unfair elections, and that it doesn't allow for a free and fair election to move forward. Part of that comes from his meeting that he had with Putin in Alaska on Friday, where Putin mentioned to him that America is the only country that has mail-in ballots. That's just not true. So many other major countries do mail-in ballots too as well. The irony is coming from Putin. I think we all know Putin's elections are not free and fair. That's a whole other conversation for another day. But also, too, fundamentally, why I want to bring that up is because that is where we enter a constitutional challenge. Because in the Constitution, it gives the rights and powers to the states. That's part of the separation of federal versus states. What the federal agency controls versus what state agencies controls. I think I talked about this a couple of weeks ago here in the MuseRoom, where I really talked about states control elections. States controls how elections are administered. States controls how they would like to govern themselves accordingly when it comes to elections. So that's a state's rights. Technically, constitutionally, the federal government can't interfere with the way the states are running. So this is where we get to a constitutional challenge, right? And the fact that there will be lawsuits that will be filed. This probably will ultimately go as far as to the Supreme Court if there is any action that is to be done on this. But the reason I wanted to bring this all to you is that because I want to highlight what the separation of federal versus state rights versus federal rights. And in this moment now, we're starting to see this intersectionality that is starting to take place in terms of what is the right of the president from a federal dynamic when it comes to election versus what are the states' right. And will Trump's executive order, could it trump states' rights? Ultimately, that's going to come into a lawsuit, and we'll have to determine what the Supreme Court is going to say about that. But this is something I really want to highlight with you all. As you guys are hearing this conversation come about, I just want to make sure that we're all very aware that states are in control of the election until we see what the next iteration is. So I don't know how this is going to unfold, but I don't see this story going away anytime soon. So I just wanted to make sure that I put that information in there, states' rights versus the federal government. That's always a fun conversation for me that I always enjoy. So I think I'll even go do a deep dive on that next week. So I'm sure there'll be some more movements. I want to see if there's going to be lawsuits that are going to be filed, any injunctions. I want to see, does President Trump walk back the executive order? Seemingly there's some restraint that may be happening, some reversing of the course that may be happening, or does he go all the way with it, right? And so that's just something I'm really interested in seeing. Jody Thomas, you have a comment. Jody says, the president saying nothing about brightness is absolutely outrageous. I actually want to lean into that because Jody is referencing what's happening with the museums and the Smithsonian. And I think Jody, you're specifically representing what's happening at the National African American Museum. That is true. The Smithsonian, the African American Museum I've been, I'm sure some of you, or a lot of you have gone. If you haven't, please go and go quickly. Wink, wink. It's not just about slavery. It's not just about the challenging times of America, but it's also too about like the beauty of America and the beauty that Black Americans have contributed to America. I remember, I haven't been there recently. I went when it first opened. But I remember the top floor was dedicated to music, right? And a celebration of music and a celebration to Black music. There was a celebration of entrepreneurship that was there. There's a celebration of so many firsts, that was there. And so it's a celebration of the tapestry of American history, which is Black history, right? Black Americans contribute and make up what is American history. So it's just not about the challenges and the downtrodden aspects of it, but it's also too about the dopeness of Black Americans, right? The dopeness that makes America great. And it's the dopeness of Black people. It's a part of that. We're a part of the tapestry, right? You can't talk American history without talking about Black Americans. We are intricately interwoven into American history. when it comes to that. I am dying to hear what Steph Order has to say about this too as well. Waylon, what up, Waylon? You says the propaganda of America is more important than the truths of this country, but the strength of this country is the contributions of all citizens. Absolutely, Waylon. That's where I'm just saying it's a tapestry. We are woven into this tapestry. And there's a saying: you can't take the salt out of the stew, right? Once the salt is poured in and mixed in, you can't separate the salt from the stew. If anyone gets a chance to go to National Museum of African American History, go. Plan to spend a full day there. One of the advantages of living in DC is most of our museums are free because they are the Smithsonian and paid by taxes. Absolutely. I don't know if you've been recently, Ian, but let me know. Do they still have the music room on the top floor? Let me know some of the last exhibits that you've seen. If I recall, I was very wildly fascinated. As you can tell, I can't stop thinking about it. Wildly fascinated by what's happening on the top floor of the music. I think one of the most stirring moments to me was seeing the Emmett Till exhibit with the casket. That was extremely hard, but you have to face it, right? It's history. It's kind of interesting seeing what I'm thinking about that exhibit now and putting that into relationship to the racial reckoning time period that we went through during the George Floyd era. I think I find really interesting. But there's so many conversations that are to be had about that. So keep the comments coming when it comes to that. Wow, good conversation, folks. Good conversation. I want to switch now over to some cultural things because the cultural thing is going to lead me to where I want to end with the Muse movement, because it's not just about a soapbox, and it's kind of where I want to challenge us as well when it comes to history. History shouldn't be politicized, just as science shouldn't be politicized. There are certain things I am down for the politicalization aspect of it. It's just par for the course. Taxes, par for the course. Healthcare, par for the course. There's so many things that are just par for the course for the politicalization aspect of it. Education, public school system, politicized, par for the course. But science shouldn't be politicized, and history shouldn't be politicized. But some of the cultural moments I was thinking about, I'm going to challenge media and my creators out there, is how our binging and viewing habits. I OD'd on the Gilded Age, which I love. It was so great about history. And seeing Black Americans in the Gilded Age, I was completely ignorant, didn't know Black America was thriving during the Gilded Age. Owned businesses and pharmaceutical companies, did not know that. Black Americans had their own balls, didn't know that. But that's the origin, makes it great. My family, we are a cotillion family. Both my sisters had cotillion balls. Me and my brother were both escorts for cotillions. So we were one of the cotillion families in Lansing. And so seeing those balls are really great to see. That's part of knowing that that Black Americans have always had a part of that, and that ball scene and ball dynamic. It was great to see it thriving. I binged it though. And that's also, I recently just binged Build the Band. Did you guys see that? What? Chokehold. But it came into this idea of binging versus waiting for episodes to drop. I actually get upset when I have to wait for the episodes to drop. I'd rather binge it all at one time. So I'm just curious, one, what are y'all watching out there? And then two, do you prefer to binge or do you prefer for episodes to come out? All right, I'm gonna give you guys a few minutes. Put in the comments, because I have some data that suggests when the ratings do well. But I want to hear from you. Do you binge or do you prefer weekly episodes? I'm gonna let you know what the data is. So Kendall, if you can show me that screen so I can see some things are coming in. Again, the question in the comment section, I want you to put in the comment sections. Do you prefer to binge or do you prefer weekly episodes to drop? All right, so it's coming in. Binge. Okay, binge, weekly, definitely binge for sure. But I will watch weekly if forced. Leland, there's no politicalization of this. Don't you politicize it, Leland. binge. Okay, Maureen, your binge Wayland's Weekly. Brandon pulled up and said, rather binge, especially with football season on the way. Would I have time to tune it every week, bro? I'm the same. Super Jones says, I'll be the first to say Love Island. Okay. I haven't seen that one. Anthony's a binger. Binge for Burns Me Hit, Eve McThree binge. Currently rewatching Scandal. Wow. Hobocop, I'm curious with you on the road as a truck driver. Do you binge or do you do episodes? How do you keep up as a truck driver on the road? Okay, so with time, it looks like we just, because remember, I was going to keep you under an hour for your lunch break. I look, the overwhelming aspect of you guys is to binge. Here is what the data and research suggests, right? Kind of blew me away. The data and research suggests that television shows actually do better when it's weekly episode drops versus binging altogether. And what it's saying is that typically about midway into a binge of a season, audience tends to trail off and drop off. But when it is a weekly episodic drop, the audience maintains its stickiness and generally tends to stick with the show all the way through its entirety. And that the show can actually have more longevity and improved in ratings when it's in weekly versus binge. I had no idea. I thought once you start binging, you just watch it all the way to the end. So I didn't even think that people were going to have drop-offs, but apparently there are drop-offs, right? But I found that wild as well. I'm actually going to drop that after this video goes up. Kendall's going to post. I'm gonna send her the research link, and so she'll post that into the link so you guys can read it yourself. It's really wildly fascinating when it comes to that, right, Shani? Is interesting too as well. All right, finally, the Muse movement. As we conclude, it ties in to the history, it ties into museums, and ties into content and culture. I think I'm putting a challenge out there to Hollywood is to make sure we're writing stories that tell the history of America. And part of the history of America is the contributions that Black Americans have made to American history. I think it's more important than ever that we lean into Hollywood to be able to tell the story that is being erased from museums. Again, I can't believe history is being politicized, but it's important now that we create stories that tells the history so that it always will be there, no matter what. And here is the Muse movements that I want to ensure that the history is going to be there, because I always don't want to be in my soapbox. I want to find solutions for us. It's time for us to make sure that we donate to cultural and historic museums. You can get to the Smithsonian if you want to currently, but as I said before, they're stripping exhibits. So I want us to go really focus on local and state. So I'm going to put these links in the chat that you can use to support and pass around to make sure that the history is always being told and being preserved. One is a National Trust for Historic Preservations. They do really good work in preserving history. So we're going to put that link in the chat so that you guys can, on this video on YouTube, so that you can click and figure out how to support, how to preserve history. There's another really great organization in Black in Historic Preservation. That's another one is blackinhispress.com. We'll put the link on there that really talks about ways to preserve Black history and how we can support that organization and that history, as well as the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservations, how that can be preserved and how it can help. But one that I really found really interesting was how to donate to state and local, which is the advocacy of national, international, and statewide preservations. And so when you click on there, it is by state, and then you can support the different societies and preservations and history entities within your state to really make sure that the history doesn't get erased, right? And so again, the Calvary is not coming to save us, as I always say. And so these are things that we can do ourselves to ensure that the history isn't erased and history can be preserved in ways that we can tap into it. Now is the time not to say history is boring. Now is the time to say history is alive and well, and we must do what we can to preserve it and to fight for it and to make sure that it's here. All right. What a great time I've had with you all today. I have thoroughly enjoyed talking with you. I enjoyed our random snap poll that we just did. Shout out to all the bingers out there. I didn't see anybody watching Build-A-Man. I'm also too upset with y'all because I didn't see any comments about the Gilded Age. That is my ish, y'all. All right. Well, look, happy Wednesday, everybody. I love y'all. Keep the conversation going. You can always hit me up at I am like Muse, M-U-S and Sam E on Instagram. That's my preferred method. You can hit me up on Twitter, but I prefer the Instagram. Also, Threads. Threads is booming right now, by the way. Get on Threads if you haven't. And also, too, tune in this Saturday for the Mike Muse Show on SiriusXM. I have another great show Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on channel 126 Urban View. Also do on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on 126 Urban View. Also, you can go back on SiriusXM app on demand. Also, in this YouTube, there are videos up. The Spike Lee video is up. Just click or go over right here to this tile to click on the Spike Lee interview. That was a good time that we had. I'm about to throw Regina King is about to go up too as well. So we over here cooking, y'all. Having a good time. I love y'all. Thank y'all for rocking with me. Cannot wait to tune in with you all next Wednesday for more MuseRoom. All right, until next time, folks. Peace. As a corny person in me says, I'm about to end the stream now. I'm about to click the button. All right, peace.